On the afternoon of December 5th, 1945, the skies over Florida were covered by a thin veil of white clouds, while the Atlantic breeze carried the salty, humid air of the coast. At Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station, 5 TBM Avengers lined up neatly on the runway, ready for the training mission known as Flight 19. According to the plan, this was a standard navigation exercise, one that had already been flown hundreds of times by other pilots. Trace a large triangle over the ocean, then return to base. The goal was to train cadets in navigation, formation flying, and long-range flights over water, skills essential to every naval aviator. The route was divided into 3 legs. First, fly straight east out over the sea, leaving behind the golden sands and palms of Florida. On the map, this marked the first side of the triangle. Second, at a designated coordinate, the squadron would turn north or south on command, tracing the second side. Finally, turn southwest to return to Florida, closing the triangle over the wide Atlantic. It sounded simple, but the true challenge lay in the fact that once over water, the pilots would have to rely entirely on their compasses and radios. At sea, there were no mountains, rivers, or towns to guide them. A minor navigational error, a small equipment failure, or even a sudden squall could be enough to throw them fatally off course. That is why this exercise was considered a crucial test before any naval pilot could be deemed combat ready. That afternoon, the atmosphere on base was both disciplined and eager. The young cadets, many barely in their 20s, climbed into their Avengers with excitement and nervous anticipation. On the ground, mechanics performed final checks. Tanks full, radios working, compasses steady. Everything was flawless, or so it seemed. The Wright R2 1600 engines thundered to life, spinning their great propellers and throwing sand and dust across the runway. When the launch signal came, each Avenger rumbled down the strip and lifted into the blue sky, massive steel bodies rising with practiced ease. From a distance, the formation looked like a flock of iron birds, flying straight out toward the endless ocean. In the lead aircraft sat Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, the squadron commander. A seasoned combat pilot, he had flown many missions over the Pacific during World War II, witnessing both triumph and loss in brutal naval battles. To him, this was just another routine drill. There was nothing to hint it would become one of aviation history's greatest mysteries. The first minutes passed uneventfully. Below them, the Florida coastline faded into a pale ribbon, replaced by the deep blue of the Atlantic. The Avengers held formation. Gauges read steady. Radios hummed with short, calm exchanges. On the map, they had drawn the first line of the fateful triangle, a straight course east, deceptively simple, yet carrying within it both test and danger. By around 3 p.m., Flight 19 had completed the first leg. Florida was now only a faint blur on the horizon. At the scheduled point, Taylor ordered the squadron to turn north for the second leg. This was where the real challenge began. No landmarks, only water and sky. At first, everything remained steady. The Avengers banked smoothly into their new heading, maintaining a tight V formation. But soon, problems began to emerge. Taylor's compass, the most critical instrument of all, started spinning erratically. At times it pointed east, then swung aimlessly. When he checked the backup compass, it too gave conflicting readings. Taylor radioed back to base. "We can't tell where we are, both compasses are out." Other pilots began reporting strange readings as well. Some compasses matched the map, others didn't. Static filled the radios, breaking up the chatter. Outside, the weather began to worsen. Dark clouds rolled in from the north, dimming the afternoon light. Below, the sea grew restless. Waves silvered in the fading sun. The horizon line blurred, sky and ocean merging into a single gray sheet. Taylor tried to steady his men. "Keep formation, don't break away. We'll adjust once we know our position." The cadets answered with clipped Rogers, but unease spread quickly. What had started as a textbook exercise was unraveling into a crisis. One young trainee gripped his map with shaking hands, the triangle he had carefully drawn now meaningless. The radio operator twisted the knobs again and again, but heard nothing except the hiss of static. In the cramped gunner stations, men stared out at the shifting clouds, wondering if they were flying in circles. From above, the 5 Avengers still looked like a disciplined formation. But in truth, they were like lost birds over an infinite sea, unaware they had only just stepped into one of aviation's most haunting enigmas. As time passed and the squadron approached what should have been the third leg, confusion deepened. They were supposed to turn southwest and head home. But no one was certain where home was anymore. Compasses spun, radios faded, maps offered no help. Taylor tried to maintain control. Keep formation. Do not separate. If contact is lost, head west. But static crackled over his words, drowning them out. Some cadets thought they saw land, only for it to vanish again. Mirage or mistake, no one knew. Darkness was falling, winds rising, waves breaking hard beneath them. Fuel gauges dropped toward empty. In each cockpit, the dreaded truth sank in. They had less than an hour left. Without landfall, they would be forced to ditch into the stormy Atlantic. The last words heard from Taylor's radio sent chills through the controllers on base. It looks like we are entering white water. We are completely lost. And then, silence. 5 Avengers, 14 men, vanished into the night. The Navy scrambled a PBM Mariner rescue seaplane with 13 crew. But 20 minutes after takeoff, it too disappeared without a trace. In one day, 27 men and 6 aircraft were swallowed by the ocean, leaving nothing behind. For days, the Navy scoured thousands of square miles of sea with ships and aircraft. Nothing was ever found. Not a raft, not a wing, not a body. From that day forward, the mystery of Flight 19 was etched into history. What began as a routine exercise became a legend, a cornerstone of the Bermuda Triangle myth, and a chilling reminder of how even steel, skill, and discipline can vanish without a trace before the vast and merciless ocean. The humid Florida air of the late afternoon clung to the runway at Fort Lauderdale, the last rays of sunlight stretching long across the tarmac as the duty officer called out, "Flight 19, pre-flight check." 6 short words, yet they carried within them the intricate machinery of a naval squadron in motion. On the desk inside the duty room, a plain white board displayed the schedule. Estimated duration, 2-3 hours. It was the fine line between a flawless training mission and a wager against the sea. 2 to 3 hours, no arbitrary figure, but the distilled wisdom of war. Long enough to sharpen navigation skills, short enough to avoid pushing cadets to the brink of fuel exhaustion. At the head of the runway, 5 TBM Avengers shuddered under the growl of their Wright R2600 engines. In the cockpit of the lead plane, Lieutenant Charles Taylor leaned forward, pencil in hand, marking the training triangle onto his map and noting the 3 turning points. Beneath his boots, the deck vibrated as though urging him on. It's time. Behind him, the navigator checked his stopwatch once more. A small instrument, yet the heartbeat of the mission. Cruising speed 200 EU 250 kilometers per h. 3 legs, total time 2 to 3 hours. Just enough fuel, with a margin for turning back if necessary. He muttered the calculation, a ritual for reassurance. The takeoff signal lit. One by one, the Avengers lifted from the ground, rising more gracefully than their bulk suggested. The formation aligned, noses pointing east toward the Atlantic. At 0:07 on the stopwatch, Florida had already shrunk to a thin line of sand and neat rows of canal-side houses. In his headset, Taylor's voice was calm. Maintain 210 kilometers per h. Altitude 1,200 meters. Report every 10 minutes. It sounded ordinary, but behind it lay the discipline of time itself. Every 10 minutes, each crew cross-checked fuel, heading, and dead reckoning. Without this rhythm, 2 to 3 hours would instantly become a reckless gamble. By 0:15, a gentle correction of the controls steadied the squadron, their path as precise as a compass point set to paper. Below, the Atlantic spread in dark blue, streaked with silver. Winds at altitude blew steadily from the southeast, light enough for comfort, strong enough that a few degrees drift could spoil the perfect triangle. The navigator called, "Crosswind southeast 1215 knots, correcting 3 degrees north." Pencil scratched map. Stopwatch clicked. 0:20. Minutes ticked into half hours. The ocean darkened. The sun dropped lower, and with every mile, the invisible clock grew heavier. At 0:40, Taylor ordered the first turn. "Prepare to bank, maintain formation, call your times." 5 voices answered. "Roger." The Avengers tilted almost in unison, etching a graceful arc across the sky. Another click of the stopwatch marked a new cycle. Everything was by the book. Fuel burn aligned with charts, speed steady in the safe middle of 220 kilometers per h, time a loyal companion. But the ocean never signs contracts with clocks, and as dusk slipped away, the weight of minutes began to change. After the first turn, the squadron entered the longest leg. The radio officer read out, "Maintain 220 kilometers per h. Estimated time to second turn, 40 to 45 minutes." They were now at the heart of the equation, balancing time within the limits of fuel. Push faster and fuel would bleed away. Fly slower and drift would steal distance. The golden mean was 230 kilometers per h. Unglamorous, but safe. Clouds thickened by 0:55. The horizon blurred, the sea darkened. The navigator adjusted 2 degrees west, noting the correction in time. At 1:05, a shift of wind nudged fuel consumption upward. At 1:15, the radios were still clear, and Fort Lauderdale marked them on schedule. But out here, there were no rails, only a clock the crew had to draw themselves, minute by minute. By 1:25, clouds closed around them. For several tense minutes, the world shrank to instruments and voices. Yet the ritual held. Every 10 minutes, headings and times were logged, the stopwatch clicked. The numbers became the only poetry a crew could trust amid endless gray. At 1:35, when the clouds opened and voices broke into laughter, it was relief as much as release. At 1:45, Taylor gave the order to turn southwest, beginning the final leg toward home. Reports would now come every 5 minutes. The air grew heavier, the fuel gauges dropped, and the silent contract with time grew tighter. By 2 o'clock, the mission had crossed the 2-hour mark, the psychological threshold. The radio officer read aloud, 2 o'clock, 220 kilometers per h, heading 235, fuel 40%. A neat report, but everyone knew variables lurked beyond the numbers. Clouds, wind, currents, all could stretch a minute into an eternity. Taylor reminded them, "Don't fight the sky, negotiate with time." At 2:15, fuel dipped to 30%. At 2:20, radio crackled faint with static. At 2:30, a gunner swore he saw land, but Taylor held them steady. "Wait 5 minutes." At 2:35, the gauges slid toward the red, nerves taut as wires. At 2:40, the horizon darkened, this time unmistakably, into the jagged outline of shore, dotted with the faint sparks of lights. The voices on the radio grew clearer. The relief was silent but palpable. At 2:45, wheels screeched against Fort Lauderdale's runway. Engines throttled down, cockpits opened, and salt air rushed in. Taylor stepped down last, pausing to rest a hand on the warm steel of his Avenger. He glanced at his wristwatch. 2 hours 47 minutes since takeoff. In the duty room, a chalk line marked the board. Flight 19-247 complete. Just a small inscription, but it closed a great equation. Speed, wind, fuel, sight. Discipline, and above all, time. If asked what had brought them back, some would say skill. Others would say luck. Taylor might have smiled and answered, "The clock, but not the one on your wrist, the one in your head." And so ended a routine training flight. Average on paper, but never average in the hearts of those who shared those 2 to 3 hours over the endless sea. Tomorrow they would fly again, the same triangle, the same rhythm. For every generation of naval aviators must learn a simple truth. Going far is not what's frightening. What's frightening is going far and forgetting time. In the early morning, a thin mist lay over the Fort Lauderdale runway, like a cold veil. Inside a small training room, yellow light spilled onto a long wooden table strewn with nautical charts, rulers, 2B pencils, stopwatches, and a gleaming magnetic compass. Training Officer Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove tapped the tip of his pencil against the table's edge, signaling the cadets to sit up straight. He didn't need to raise his voice. A handful of short sentences from a man who had survived many Pacific patrols were enough to silence the room. Today's lesson, he said, is not about flying pretty. It's about finding your way home alive. He placed the compass in the middle of the table and pushed it toward the cadets. Out at sea, all you have are four things: compass, clock, chart, radio, four legs of a table. Lose one leg, the table tilts. Lose two, it collapses. The old air conditioner hummed in the corner. Hargrove drew a simple triangle on the board. The first point was the base. The second lay offshore. The third was the turn back home. This is the standardized pattern you'll fly this afternoon. Imagine the ocean as blank paper. No trees, no mountains, no streetlights. All the reference points exist on paper and in your head. He pointed back at the compass. The compass tells you direction. The clock tells you how long you've been on that heading. The chart tells you where you are if you bother to draw the path you've flown. And the radio, if it behaves, tells you where others think you are. A sharp smile crossed his face. The radio usually doesn't behave. The morning passed in steady rhythm, measuring bearings, adding and subtracting wind drift, estimating leeway, calculating ground speed from indicated airspeed. Hargrove didn't just teach formulas. He made the cadets speak their calculations aloud, as if telling themselves, forcing the brain to memorize the path. Heading 090 for 18 minutes, speed 120 knots, 5 degrees north drift from southeast wind. At 18 minutes, check fuel gauge, confirm heading, mark the chart, log the time. The phrases repeated until they became muscle memory. Midway through, Hargrove abruptly shut off the lights and pulled the blinds, leaving only a dim glow in the room. Now, he said, pretend the sky has closed. You will learn to listen to the clock. He clicked the stopwatch. Its dry tick cracked the silence. 10 minutes per report. Not early, not late. If you let 10 minutes slip into 7 or 12 because you're staring at clouds, you've just tossed your chart into the ocean. The cadets chuckled softly, but when he turned, his voice lowered. The sea does not laugh. By early afternoon, they stepped onto the runway. The salty southeast wind lashed across their faces, carrying the smell of oil from the hangars. 5 TBM Avengers stood in line, their navy blue fuselages gleaming in the sun. Fresh paint at the wing edges still carried a sharp scent. At the crew stations, each team checked Hargrove's 4 essentials: spare compass, stopwatch, sea chart, radio tuned to frequency. One cadet, Rains, touched the edge of his map as though it were a talisman. He remembered the morning's words. The compass will bring you home if you give it time. The chart will bring you home if you give it a trail. Takeoff. Wheels lifted from the ground, the ocean spread below like a vast mirror. Rains sat behind the pilot. Heavy headphones clamped on, notebook open. Heading 090, time 0 o'clock. He drew a straight line on the chart, marking the first point. Wind buffeted the fuselage, a reminder that this was the real sky, not the classroom. 10 minutes later, he clicked the stopwatch. 010. No visual landmarks, he muttered. Compass steady, IS 120, southeast wind 12 knots, 5-degree north correction. The second dot appeared on the chart, 2 dots connected by a thread running out to sea. By 020, the horizon was swallowed by a thin band of cloud. Light dimmed. The sea turned to lead. The compass needle trembled slightly. Not much, but enough to stretch a novice's nerves. Rains gripped his pencil, listening as the pilot asked over intercom, "Heading?" He answered in cadence. 090, 5 north correction, 6 minutes to mark. His voice was dry but steady. Click. 026. 2 minutes to report. Hargrove had once said, counting down 2 minutes was a trick to discipline yourself. 2 minutes kept your mind from wandering with the clouds. At 0:28, Rains checked the radio. Clear channel, the shore station answering with a single Roger. No one had told him that Roger could vanish at any time, but building the habit of timed reporting meant the crew would hold on to the thread of time even if the signal broke. At 0:30, he drew the third dot, noting fuel drop matches projection. A slanted line on his notebook tracked the expected descent of the gauge, drawn that morning as a reference. If the needle fell too quickly, it meant excessive throttle, headwind, or fear pressing the pedal. Hold 120, he reminded. Don't overcompensate. By 0:35, clouds gathered thicker. Below, the sea was smooth and empty. No ships, no smoke, just a blank horizon. Rains leaned close to the compass. The needle flicked left. He didn't report. Morning drills had taught him not to let one twitch of the compass turn into a twitch of the mind. He waited 5 seconds. The needle settled back to 090. Steady, he wrote. The 5-second rule, Hargrove had said, saves more lives than you think. At 040, the first turn, the pilot banked. Heading 015. Rains reset the stopwatch, drew the new line, added north correction for the southeast wind. Ahead, the sea grew darker. Winter twilight always came early on damp days. He thought briefly of past crews who had flown this pattern so often they could trace it blind. Navigation, Hargrove had said, is not about finding where you are. It's about never allowing yourself to disappear. The 10-minute dot rhythm continued. The radio remained clear, though occasional static whispered as the squadron passed through low clouds. Each time, Rains didn't retune right away. He pressed the stopwatch, counted 3 slow beats, then tried again. Don't flinch, Hargrove had said. The radio is a kind neighbor, not a parent. Your parents are compass, clock, chart. At 0:55, his pencil snapped. Trivial, but in mid-ocean, small things could spiral into chaos. Rains didn't fumble for a replacement. He marked 0:55 with the broken tip, and only at 0:57 did he switch pencils. Keep the rhythm first, fix the mistake after, he recalled. When he looked up, the sea was still sea. The line still line, and the pilot asked, Status? Steady, 3 minutes to 1 o'clock. The first hour passed this way, not with thunder or storm, but with a chain of small decisions placed in the right order at the right time. Rains marked 1 o'clock, smoothed his chart, and listened to the steady engine hum beneath his feet. He smiled. Compass, clock, chart, radio. The 4 legs of the table still stood, and somewhere in his head, Hargrove's voice echoed, Good, now be ready for the harder part, keeping balance when one of the legs begins to shake. Outside, dusk lowered its rim across the horizon. The sea shifted to a cold violet hue. He drew a thin red line under 1 o'clock, like a bar of music, and that sheet of music, if he kept the tempo, would play to the very end. After an hour of steady navigation, Flight 19 entered the second phase of training, formation flying. Over the featureless ocean, maintaining position and spacing between 5 TBM Avengers was a matter of survival. In the lead plane, Taylor eased the stick, signaling a change. The others responded instantly, forming a perfect V. Their vast steel wings stretched wide, each distance measured by eye and instinct. With no modern radar or automation, everything depended on precision, heartbeat, and trust. A cadet in Plane 3 whispered his morning lesson, Safe distance is life. Too close, one jolt means disaster. Too far, the radio weakens. Formation breaks. He held 300 meters from Taylor's left wingtip, eyes locked on the flashing recognition light. Inside, the navigator's voice sounded through the intercom. Hold rhythm, no rushing, no lagging. Each word was a drumbeat holding the group together. A gust of wind. A quick correction. Taylor called, Ease throttle, hold line. All 5 Avengers banked as one, like an invisible hand guiding them. Then clouds swallowed them. For an instant, formation dissolved into shadows. Urgent voices crackled. Lost visual. Number 4. Hold altitude. Sweat beaded on hands, gripping throttles. In that dense gray, collision was more real than any enemy. Taylor's calm voice steadied them. No one change altitude. Straight ahead, steady power. The cloud will pass. His tone dropped like an anchor into chaos. Engines drummed in unison, and within a minute, light returned. The squadron emerged intact. A collective breath sighed over the radio, followed by silence, as if vowing never to break formation. The sky deepened with twilight. The Avengers carved black arrows across the fading light. Every distance, angle, and throttle adjustment, a choreographed dance of steel. And each cadet learned, formation was not just technique. It was trust, the art of tying one's life to others, knowing a single mistake could cost the whole team. With orientation and formation complete, the squadron faced the last challenge, long-range flight. It seemed simple: hold speed, conserve fuel, keep heading. But in truth, it was the harshest test. It demanded endurance, patience, and mental resilience. In each cockpit, the fuel gauge became a second compass. Every drop consumed was logged, compared to the projected slope in notebooks. A cadet in Plane 4 whispered, "At 220 kilometers per h, we lose this much every 10 minutes. If the needle drops faster, we're wasting." His pencil etched another line, connecting dots, each line a fragile thread holding them above the sea. Long flight was as much psychological as mechanical. After 90 minutes, in cramped cockpits with the wind howling outside, minds dulled, drifting toward open-eyed sleep. Instructors had warned, when the sky feels too quiet, make the brain work. Scan gauges, check compass, cross-check chart, or talk to your crew. And so, over the intercom, short phrases echoed: fuel steady, heading steady, speed steady. Simple words, but antidotes against fatigue. By 2 hours, the sun leaned into the west, its red light spilling fire over the ocean. The Avengers were 5 black arrows piercing a mirrored sea. Beauty sharpened the pressure. Time was running out. At 220 kilometers per h, every adjustment was a negotiation with fuel. A gust from the southeast jolted the formation. Taylor's order came crisp: "Hold formation, correct north." They obeyed, calm, disciplined, the fruit of training. When the fuel gauge sank to a quarter, tension filled the cockpits. This was the threshold: either find land or prepare for a sea landing. The radio man in Plane 2 reported, "Flight 19, 2 hours 30 minutes. Heading southwest, fuel 25%. Only static answered. Silence hung heavy. Then, at the edge of the horizon, a shadow darkened. A gunner in Plane 3 cried, "Land! I see land!" Eyes strained at the red haze of sunset. Yes, jagged coast, with faint sparks of lights. Florida. Relief swept through the squadron. At 2:50, wheels screeched against Fort Lauderdale's runway. The timing matched the plan almost perfectly. The cadets pulled off their helmets, sweat-soaked but grinning wide. They had passed the hardest test, not just of flying far, but of holding discipline, patience, and faith in their 4 fragile tools: compass, clock, chart, radio, and in each other. That night, in the canteen, one cadet murmured, "Out on the ocean, what kept us alive wasn't just steel or fuel, it was numbers." His friend nodded. "And people." In the tactical briefing room at Fort Lauderdale, a massive map stretched across the wall, crisscrossed with red, blue, and yellow lines like a labyrinth. An officer struck marked points with a long ruler, his voice resonant. "This afternoon, you will fly out to sea with a simulated mission, locate and neutralize an enemy submarine. Treat this as real war. If you grow careless, the submarine will escape. The fleet will be endangered, and you will have failed." The young pilots sat in rows, backs straight, eyes fixed on the map. None of them treated this as just another drill. For them, it was a chance to sharpen combat instinct, a bridge between training and the brutal reality of war. By afternoon, as the TBM Avengers left the runway, the squadron felt as though it were entering a live battle. The intercom barked sharp commands. Number 1, hold 220 kilometers per h, heading east. Number 2, eyes out for the target. Number 3, prepare torpedo run. Though no submarine lurked beneath the waves, the image was vivid in their minds, adrenaline surging through their veins. After more than 40 minutes, they entered the designated operation zone. The coordinator's order came, deploy line abreast. Sweep for target. The Avengers fanned out, pilots' eyes locked on the shimmering sea below, searching for any telltale trace. Gunners strained to detect shadows, ready to call out danger. Suddenly, one Avenger signaled, "Suspicious wake, bearing 045." Instantly, the formation banked, angling toward it. Plane 3's pilot dropped altitude, rehearsing a torpedo release. In the cockpit, his grip tightened on the lever, heartbeat hammering as though he were diving on a real enemy. When the imaginary torpedo left the bay, laughter crackled from the coordinator over the radio. "Target hit, fleet secure." The laugh carried relief, but also a reminder. Though still in training, their seriousness in each maneuver was what would save lives someday. On the return leg, Taylor, the squadron leader, spoke slowly. "You felt it yourselves. No real bullets were fired, yet sweat soaked your backs. That proves this drill mirrors true combat. And one day, when you depart this base, you'll do the same. Only then, the target beneath your wings will be the enemy." The squadron fell silent. The ocean below no longer looked merely beautiful. In their eyes, it was a battlefield, and today's flight paths were preparations for tomorrow's survival. Far from shore, Flight 19 entered the most perilous part of training, simulated disorientation. This was not just technical practice, but a rehearsal for the life or death moments of war, when pilots must find their way home with every landmark erased. Inside the cockpit, the coordinator deliberately spun the compass, simulating failure. He looked at the lead pilot and nodded. "Disorientation, your move." The pilot tightened his grip, breathing deep. No land, no ships, only gray cloud, silver waves, and cold numbers on dials. Taylor's voice rang over the radio. "Stay calm, do not change altitude. Fly straight for 5 minutes, then recheck. In disorientation, your real enemy is panic." All 5 Avengers held 220 kilometers per h. Time dragged. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Every second thudded with the pilots' racing hearts. On the map, the coordinator marked a large question mark at 2:15. That question wasn't just on paper. It hovered in their minds. Where are we? At 2:20, static flooded the radio. A cadet shouted, "Signal's gone!" His fingers fumbled with the dial. Taylor's voice cut through faintly. "This is reality. If the radio dies, remember dead reckoning. Estimate from speed and time. Don't leave your mind blank. Fill it with numbers." The coordinator calculated quickly. Speed 220 kilometers per h, heading 090 for 18 minutes. Southeast wind 12 knots. Estimated position 70 kilometers offshore. He dotted the chart. Just a speck, but an anchor in the void. In Plane 4, Cadet Rains gripped his pencil, drawing another thin line. He recalled the morning's lesson. Losing landmarks does not mean losing the path, as long as you keep the rhythm of calculation. He repeated like a chant, speed, heading, time. Speed, heading, time. Numbers became a prayer against fear. By 2:30, clouds thickened, twilight nearly gone. Sea and sky fused into one gray void. The horizon vanished. Pilots lost spatial sense. Up and down dissolved. One cadet cried, "I can't tell if my plane is level." Taylor barked back, "Look at the artificial horizon. Trust the instrument, not your eyes. Eyes will betray you." Those words pulled them back from panic. Each glued their gaze to the dial, forcing belief in lines and needles over the devouring dark. At last, the radio caught a faint signal from base. The squadron exhaled in relief. Even a thread of static felt like light in suffocating night. Taylor spoke evenly. "You've just faced what war at sea will bring, disorientation. Remember the pounding heart when the compass spun. Remember the fear when the radio hissed. And remember, if you hold the rhythm, if you hold discipline, you still have a chance to return." In the silence that followed, every pilot understood. Today's drill was more than training. It was learning how to face death and how to carve out life in the middle of the infinite. Darkness closed in as Flight 19 entered the final leg of training. Sunset blazed red on the horizon, casting fire on the steel wings of 5 Avengers, turning them into glowing arrows plunging into night. This was the ultimate test: discipline and absolute trust in one another. In the lead cockpit, Taylor's voice came slow, firm. "We are no longer 5 individuals. From now until landing, think of us as one body. If one falters, the whole collapses." The words echoed in every headset. They knew discipline wasn't just obedience. It was the invisible bond keeping them whole above the endless sea. As clouds cut visibility, a cadet in Plane 3 overbanked. Immediately, Taylor's command cracked. "Number 3, correct, hold line." The young pilot flushed, though unseen. He straightened instantly, hearing a calm voice from a wingman. "Good. Stay steady." No reproach, only guidance and trust, the lifeblood of formation. Elsewhere, a radio man checked frequencies. Static hissed, signals faint, but he reported steadily. "Mark 210, fuel 30%, formation stable." His calmness was discipline incarnate. Even with fading signals, he kept rhythm alive. A sudden gust rocked the formation. The Avengers wavered, distances stretching. For moments, no one was sure they still held the pattern. Then Taylor's deep voice grounded them. "Hold speed, hold altitude, trust your wingmen." Hands tightened on controls, resisting rash moves. Within half a minute, symmetry returned. That brief chaos carved a lasting truth. Trust was their shield against collapse. When Florida's coast appeared faintly on the horizon, relief rippled silently. Yet no one cheered, no one eased. The Avengers held perfect formation, precise as in the manual. They knew one lapse at the end could erase hours of discipline. Touchdown came in sequence, all 5 landing neatly. Engines wound down, cockpits opened, sweat-soaked backs exhaled. A cadet removed his helmet, glanced at the man beside him, and nodded. No words needed. The trust forged in the gray sky would follow them into real war. In the debriefing room, Taylor concluded, "Today, you learned 3 things. First, discipline keeps chaos at bay. Second, trust keeps the formation intact. And third, if you hold both, no matter how vast the sea, you'll find your way home." Silence filled the room, not from exhaustion, but from reflection. For each man, today's flight was not just training. It was a silent promise between comrades who shared sky and fate. We will return as long as we keep discipline and trust.